Welcome to this episode of The Patrick Coffin Show, which is brought to you by our good friends at Covenant Eyes. Go to covenanteyes.com, put my name, Patrick, as a coupon. You get 30 days to test drive this magnificent software that not only blocks 99.999% of pornography from your house and removing access from everyone who lives in your home that you love and care about, it also sends search words and pages. You cannot trick this out. It all goes to a third party. So it's blocking and it's also accountability. So covenanteyes.com, my name, Patrick, gives you 30 days faux free. If you're looking at porn and you can't stop, if you've got someone in your house and you know it's a problem, no matter who you are, covenanteyes.com, check it out. It's worth it. My name, Patrick. Key word for your coupon to test drive for a month. Today's topic is so important, it's visceral, it's primal, and that is the catastrophic bleed of people out of the Catholic Church. 6 times more people leave every year than come in. That's a lot of exit lanes, and most of the people who leave do so before they're 24 years old. This is a teenage problem, and blessed be God, Taylor Marshall has part of the solution. We're going to talk about Catholic life prep and what you can do to keep your kids and older kids Catholic right here on The Patrick Coffin Show. Yes, indeed, my good friend Dr. Taylor Marshall is the founder of the New St. Thomas Institute and the author of a growing number of books, fiction and nonfiction, books in the area of philosophy and Catholic theology and much more. He's also, by divine providence, a Texas Aggie. He joins us now from our neighbor to the south, the Lone Star State of Texas. Hey, Taylor.
Hey, Patrick. Good to be back with you again.
I'm glad that if I say, whoop, you know exactly what that means.
Whoop. Yep.
Hey, so you write best-selling books for young adults, too. Maybe we can start there. The power of fiction and story to keep people hooked into the messages and the premises therein. Tell us about your nonfiction stuff.
Fiction or nonfiction?
Oh, sorry.
Fiction.
I did a mental spoonerism. Fiction, yes.
Well, I looked at the last century, the greatest theologians out there are guys like C.S. Lewis. And you talk about impact, Tolkien, yeah. Yes, John Paul II wrote good stuff. Yes, Gary Lagrange, lots of good stuff, biblical stuff being done. But the most impact was made through the mode of fiction. And I thought, I need to get in on that. And so I love fiction. I love novels. I love fantasy. And so beginning with stories I just told my own kids, they turned into this 3-part trilogy, and it's historical fiction, and it's a retelling of St. George and the Dragon. Mm-hmm. It begins in the year 8299, and it traces the journey of a young man who is the young St. George, and is meeting with guys like St. Nicholas and St. Christopher and the popes and all kinds of things, climaxing with Diocletian. And so I put it out there. It's kind of, you put a nonfiction book out, it's about Paul or Judaism or apologetics, there's footnotes, you can check them out. That's it. But when you put art out, you put fiction out, it's your soul. So it's kind of vulnerable, but it's been really popular. The first 2 were bestsellers on Amazon, and people love them right now. The first book is on sale at Amazon Kindle for, I think, 99 cents. So you can check it out. The paperback's on sale for Advent. I think it's like $11 or $12. So
you think it's worth the 99 cents? Is that what you're saying?
It's definitely worth the 99 cents. Yeah, I think so. So if you're into fiction and you want to try out something new, or just go and read the reviews and see if it's legit, check it out.
This is a good unrehearsed segue to our topic, and that is the Troops of St. George is something else that we founded as an alternative to the self-destruction of the Boy Scouts of America. Did you notice that the Girl Scouts are now suing the organization because they try to rebrand as Scouts? It's just, I'm sorry, it's hilarious. Just the left eating itself. And just
yeah. Well, the Boy Scouts tried to sue me personally when I started the Troops of St. George, because I'm an Eagle Scout, and they said, you can't call yourself an Eagle Scout and do this. I'm like, I am an Eagle Scout. Yeah, it's crazy.
That is astounding. I didn't know.
Yeah, they relented, but the Troops of St. George is going strong. It's an alternative to Boy Scouts. But what's different about it, Patrick, is that we require the participation of the father or the grandfather at all the activities, all the campouts. 2 reasons. A, we want fathers to be catechized and grow in adventure and do cool stuff, right? Yep. We also want the boys, the young boys and the teenage boys, 100% supervised by their father.
Well,
Can you wonder why in the modern church why we'd want
I certainly
that?
can. Well, it's a huge weak link that's being strengthened. So I'm going to put the link to the Troops of St. George in the show notes at patrickcoffin.media. Okay, I said at the top of the show that there's a population bleed out, and if you read the research of the Pew Research people and the CARA, right, the Center for Applied Research and the Apostolate from Georgetown University. I don't know how many people know how catastrophic this is, Taylor. We're not talking about, the old Chestertonian thing or possibly Evelyn Wow. You leave the church, but then there's a twitch on the fishing line. You come home. Most people don't come home. They've definitively left, and we'll get into the reasons why people leave. But how did you stumble upon this research, and what was your reaction to it?
Well, I mean, you were on Catholic Answers. You're on the speaking circuit, and every Q&A I have ever done, I think, maybe, ends, there are people asking questions. And then at some point, I'm sure you've experienced this every time, an older gentleman, usually an older woman, stands up, a little tear in her eye, and says, I had 5 kids or 2 kids, and they went to Catholic schools, and all of them or a few of them are no longer in the church. And my husband and I thought we did everything. And no matter what we say or what we do, it just seems to push them away. What are your words to me? And what do you say in a Q&A after a conference to that woman? You can't just say, "Well, here's a good book" or whatever. So I heard that year after year after year, and of course we just say, "Well, we'll pray for you and pray for your kids." But I thought there is a major bleeding out, a hemorrhaging. And once I saw the stats that you just referred to, and I'll share some of those in a second, I realized this is the elephant in the room for the Catholic Church in the West, especially in America. No one is talking about it. Our bishops have said nothing about it. And, those that leave the Catholic Church, 81% of them will do it before the age of 24.
Yeah. Think of that. 8 out of 10 gone. They're barely out of college, and they're out of here.
70% right now of adults who were raised in Catholic homes are no longer practicing Catholics. Not receiving sacraments, not going. 70%. 10% of all adults in America identify as ex-Catholic.
Yeah, I've heard it's
1 out of 10.
Ex-Catholics are the largest denomination in America.
It's true. We are the largest denomination. And then 51% of people who were raised Catholic no longer claim to be Catholic. They've taken off that label. So and they're not necessarily atheists. A lot of them are evangelicals or go to different religions. So, I just spun out those numbers right there. Those are true numbers. These are verified sociological numbers. How come this? First of all, why is this happening? And then secondly, what do we do as bishops, priests, but more importantly, parents? What do we do to ensure that our kids stay Catholic? It's much better to say, how do we prevent the problem than my adult child is now 45. Now what do I do? I mean, that's a lot harder to unravel than it is, hey, my kid's 9 years old. What can I start doing?
Yeah.
Right. Not that there's not hope. Not that there's not hope. But, I think we need to start thinking, okay, let's go back to when they have their first communion. What do we do?
Yeah. Much better to have the fish on the deck first rather than have to reel them in from 200 yards. Yeah. I just went deep sea fishing after Thanksgiving, and it's exhausting.
Are you sore?
Oh, it's a total workout. I've still got a blood blister on my finger from the
where you roll it and then you arch your back.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, exactly.
And
that's good work.
And you pretend it's fun. It is fun. Well, let's diagnose some of the causes before we get to the solution that you're proposing through Catholic Life Prep. I want to talk about the new St. Thomas Institute as well. What do you say to people who go, well, the problem is 50 years old. It's called Vatican II. The Second Vatican Council is the cause of this bleed, and nobody wants to admit it. What say you?
I think it is part of the problem. I think we had what Archbishop Vigano calls weaponized ambiguity introduced in the documents of the Second Vatican Council. Patrick, you and I can sit all day with all the documents of Vatican II and make them orthodox and make them edifying and give the pious read on it. But as we saw already by 1968, 69, and into the 70s, there's a whole cohort of people in the church who took the ambiguity that was in those documents and ran with it. You give the devil an inch, he'll take a mile. Mm-hmm. Unlike previous councils, like the Council of Nicaea, First Council of Nicaea, or even Trent.
Or Vatican I.
for Vatican I, there's not a lot of ambiguity there. First of all, it's shorter, and then the statements are very concise, and then there's just not a lot of rhetoric or linguistic flourish that we see in the Second Vatican documents, which are huge and long.
Yeah, just maybe linger on one example. If you look at Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution of the Church in the modern world, which is a mouthful, it, in number 48, I want to say 48 through 50 or 52, there's a reference in a footnote to a commission that's studying the question of birth control. And the words, I'm not talking about the spirit of Vatican II, nothing abstract or arcane. The words themselves can be taken more than one way. One thing they can't be taken as a thundering denunciation of contraception as an intrinsic evil. It's almost like the opposite of casti connubii, when Pius XI weighed in at the last day of 1930. He didn't say it, but it was against the Anglican Church's decision to depart from the ancient Christian teaching. But in Gaudium et Spes, there's a kind of tentativeness, and it says that, I'm summarizing now, Catholics should not feel free to depart from Christian norms, but stay tuned, because there's going to be a document that's definitive, which didn't come until 1968. That is a long pause, and I think that's part of the reason why the anticipation of a change, this earthquake change, came, because they found some warrant for it in the documents. Am I overplaying the card, or is this?
No, I think you're exactly right. And I think people are starting to realize that, in this year right now, we're looking back. And, there's a graph. I can't put it up on the screen because we're not screen sharing. But if you look at mass attendance in America, and you look at it from 1930 all the way to 2018, from about 69, 70, 68, to 1975, it is a sheer drop-off in mass attendance in America. And the sharpest descent is young Catholics. I think it's under age 25. So 15 to 25. That was the biggest drop-off. And it's like watching a guy skydive off of a building into a parking lot. Something happened in those years in which young people in America just said, it's not for me.
So much was going on then. I give a talk on the media's war on the family, and the 60s really began in 1965. If you look at the Beatles' first appearance and Elvis being shot from the waist up, those are all very conservative family value thing. It was kind of...
Yeah, the Beatles still wear their suits up until about 65.
They weren't dropping acid and thinking they were walruses yet. And then you have 65 and the end of the Second Vatican Council and the destruction of the Hayes Production Code, which was then called the Breen Office, which governed Hollywood's moral content. And then you had Haight-Ashbury and LSD experimentation and the Tet Offensive and Martin Luther King. The whole thing came unraveled at this point where if you're from Mars and you're looking at the Catholic Church on Earth, this is the time when explicit discipleship should have kicked in. But the opposite happened. This is all tabulated, by the way. You mentioned the bleed out beginning in the late 60s. Kenneth C. Jones has a book that I think should be required reading. You may have seen this, Taylor. Index of Leading Catholic Indicators, the Church since Vatican II. That's the stark reality. Now, does that mean the Second Vatican Council is an illegitimate council or has major heresies? When that's not what we're saying. So talk a little bit, just give one more caveat to what you're not saying about the council itself.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we need to become sede vacantis and go back to 1958. I'm not even saying that we need to reject the council. But I think we are waking up to the fact that we had weaponized ambiguity. It was used against us. We need to find clarity. And it's really there's two things to it. One is the actual content of the council. And then the other one you've referenced already is the liturgical change and the ambiguity. And the main difference really between, from like the Latin Mass from 1962 and the new Mass in 1970 is that there were many options introduced. So the priest can choose 4 Eucharistic prayers. He can, use this penitential rite or this penitential rite. Right. And what that gives the priest is the sense of being a DJ or of being in charge of the liturgy. So it's
an overseer instead of a steward.
Yeah. So he's like, I can choose this. I can choose that. And over time, you couple that with facing the congregation. He becomes kind of more and more like an entertainer or one who's in charge of deciding what the liturgy is going to look like from Sunday to Sunday. It can be different. And that encourages him to therefore make a few more extra modifications or to enculturate it a little bit more. And so we started seeing crazy things by the 1980s.
I wonder if this is somehow inadvertent, but present in the word presider.
Yeah, I don't like that.
He presides over the Mass like a conductor presides over an orchestra. Instead of, he acts in persona Christi, not just in the name of, right? Persona, in the person of Christ, and not in persona JC, Johnny Carson. Because some priests, and this is the irony of people who criticize the traditional Latin Mass as being, the priest's back is to us. It's not about the priest in the extraordinary form. It is about the priest so often, and it affects people's Mass attendance, where they're going, oh, where's Father so-and-so? I really like him. He's funny. I like his homilies. He gives us sports anecdotes and makes it real, as opposed to, I tweeted out once, I want my pilots facing the same direction as I am,
Yeah, I want to turn around. Hey, look forward, right. Look forward.
Yeah, by the way, I'm not a Latin Mass only guy. I love Summorum Pontificum by Benedict XVI. I think the more Latin Mass, I'd love to have a T-shirt. More Latin, please. So that works for me. But
I always say, well, why has he got his back to us? I can't hear him right. Well, he's not talking to you. That's what I always say. He's not addressing you. And, sometimes you don't even know who the priest is until you get to the gospel and he turns around. Mm-hmm. The whole time he just got, unless he's got a certain bald spot or red hair, you don't really know who the priest is. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good thing. In persona Christi means in the person of Christ. When the priest says, this is my body, my refers to Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's not Father Bob's body. Right. It's Father McGillicuddy or Monsignor so-and-so. It's my is Jesus. So he is standing in for Jesus Christ. And there's this understanding in the Eastern Church and the Western Church up until the last few decades that the priest needs to be disguised. He's in a costume. And the reason he is disguised and dressed up is to remind us that he is in persona Christi. He doesn't get to wear his favorite Hawaiian shirt to the altar.
Right.
He has to wear a costume.
Did you see the Irish film Calvary, starring Brendan Gleeson?
No.
I recommend it. It's very gnarly, lots of potty words. I remember Archbishop Chaput and Bishop Barron giving it 2 thumbs up. I've seen it twice. It's a modern day priest. He's a widower, and it's really something else. But I read an interview with the director, John Michael McDonough, and he talked about the soutane. The priest always has a cassock on, and he said, I was thinking about the priesthood and what this guy's up against, and he likened the cassock to the cape of a superhero. He has to put that on because he's fighting evil now, not on his own resources.
That's right.
So I think that the insights feed each other.
All the superheroes have an alter ego because we need to know that the heroic is supernatural. It's beyond the human nature. And of course, our Lord has a human nature, but it's united to his divine nature. And so it's unbelievable that a priest could do that. I mean, just think about it. The priest can say, this is my body, and turn bread and wine into the flesh and blood of the Logos. Yeah. So we dress him up. Mm-hmm. It helps us believe.
Let's turn to some of the solution here, because as we go, we'll talk about why people leave. You mentioned the power of fiction and the theologians, C.S. Lewis, J.R. Tolkien. You can add that Shisako Endo and Graham Greene and Evelyn Waugh. Yeah, lots of seed planted. Mm-hmm. Jesus never teaches Greek philosophy in the Gospels, but he does tell simple parables, simple stories. And in some sense, as a church, we seem to have lost our story. We don't participate in salvation history as previous generations did. There's a kind of a narrative thread that's been cut off somehow. And when people leave for evangelicaldom or some other denomination, Catholics really should listen to why they say they leave, rather than go, oh, well, it's just emotion. They just want the T-shirt. They like the music. Because there's a connectivity that those communities provide. There's a welcome. There's a genuine warmth. There's like name tag Sunday. People care about you. Whereas Catholicism has become kind of atomized and depersonalized. Let's face it, you go to a foreign city, you walk into Mass, sometimes it's so cold you feel like you can skate up to the altar. That has to change. We have to become more more human, more welcoming, more individually oriented. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think one of the problems there is that we as Catholics have been gravitating towards the megachurch model. More and more, your parishes are no longer just 400 or 500 at a mass. We now have masses 2,000-3,000. I'm sure in California you're seeing this even more and more. Here in Texas we're seeing it more and more. And I go to a smaller parish, a FSSP parish, and it's been growing a lot too. But there is, since the masses have more like 400 or 500 people in them, names, you see faces, and it's just easier to have bonds with people. Yeah. It's a matter of numbers. But also, you're right. The Protestants, and I used to be an Anglican priest, so I used to be a Protestant. Yep. There was much more opportunity to know the clergy and know one another because they're so good at small groups and Bible studies. Even these big mega churches down here in Texas that have 20,000 members, the very first thing they do when you join the church is they get you into a small group because they know you will be swallowed up by the monstrous beast of 20,000 people. Yeah. It'll get cold even in those contexts. So they require you to be in small groups. And these are groups from 5 to 20 people, and you're meeting with them every week or every month. And as Catholics, I think that's something that, we do need. A lot of people, whether it's Opus Dei or Bible groups or whatever, they find smaller, tangible groups in which they can be edified. And I think people who persevere, that's one of the solutions that we should talk about is just being part of a community of like-minded people. And one of the problems when an 18-year-old goes to college and switches groups and he's out of state or she's out of state, if they don't connect in the first 18 weeks with that local Catholic community, gone.
Yeah, my friend Curtis Martin, who founded Fellowship of Catholic University Students, he says, I believe the last thing he told me was it's 2 days. If the missionaries don't connect in 2 days, 4 years, they just don't happen. That connectivity doesn't happen. Taylor, I think it's you planted a bee in my bonnet a few months ago, something you wrote about the mega diocese, like the massive metropolitan see. Isn't that part of the macro? Just look at the macro systemic issue of the lack of encouraging people to become disciples, is that you've got hundreds and hundreds of parishes led by one man who then needs auxiliaries. And it just becomes a massive ecclesial Walmart of impersonal numerology. That individual connectivity and care is gone. Did the early church envision like the Los Angeles Archdiocese with a bazillion people?
No. I mean, if you just drive through Italy, every little town has its own bishop and cathedral and piazza. Like Assisi, which is a tiny little town, has its own bishop and cathedral. Yeah. In the early church, it was the idea that every single diocese was actually a town. It wasn't a metropolis, right? And unfortunately, in America, in that article, I trace out that because we were America grew so fast out of nothing, right? And so we had these giant territorial dioceses, and we never really did that medieval slow growth of the diocese and the bishop here, bishop. Yeah. And so we have what's called the mega diocese. And even if you had the most saintly bishop in the world, just take and you put him over Archdiocese of Los Angeles, he's not going to do a good job. That's impossible. We talk about, we want our students to have a good teacher-student ratio. They show that if it's one teacher with 10 to 18 students, you get optimal learning. Yeah. You would go above that and learning just crashes. Test scores crash. Same thing in the church. If you have one priest for every 6,000 people or one bishop for every 3 million Catholics, your retention rate fails, your catechesis fails. It's no matter how holy you are and how good you are and how good your seminary training is, you can't cope with the avalanche of numbers.
I think it was the 2016 Pew Research the survey of why young people leave. 2%, according to that particular survey, said it was because of the priestly abuse crisis. There's a lot of moral panic about that because it's in the news every 5 minutes and it dominates things. But people have more arcane, more kind of workaday reasons. Mass is boring. You've heard this before, right? Mass is boring. I don't get anything out of it. My friend Tom Wilson, most famous for playing Biff in the Back to the Future movies, tells young people, maybe you're boring.
Yeah.
If you don't know anything about music, then opera is going to be boring. If you know nothing about history, then Europe's going to be boring. And certainly, Taylor, the catastrophic destruction of Ireland is Exhibit A of why cultural Catholicism is dead.
Yes, it is. And what St. Patrick was able to accomplish in a generation has been undone completely in the last few decades in Ireland. Mm-hmm. It shows you how fast people can be evangelized and how fast they can be unevangelized. Ireland, just as a microcosm, as an island, is a perfect example of that. And Patrick was doing the old evangelization. It wasn't the new evangelization. He was doing the old evangelization. Every time Patrick said Mass, guess what language it was in? Latin.
I was going to Ebonics.
yeah, Latin. Did the people of Ireland know that? No, but he exhibited great preaching and great holiness, and that's really what we need. Mm-hmm. When I was researching for Life Prep, I wanted to talk to parents and young adults who had successfully raised all their kids Catholic. Like if you're a mother of 9 kids and all your kids are going to Mass as adults, like you're the jackpot. I want to spend 5 hours talking to you and picking your brain.
Yeah.
So I just messaged out to about 80,000 subscribers. Hey, I want to hear from you. If you adult children, if they've left the church and they've come back, I want to hear about that. If they've left the church, I want to hear from you. If all your kids are in the church, I would definitely want to hear from you. Mm-hmm. And then also young adults, if you left the church and came back, I want to hear. Basically, I just want to hear from you and your experience. And so I collated all that data. And I was able to reduce it basically to 2 things of why young adults leave the Catholic Church or why they stay. These 2 things. Mm-hmm. Is it? You want to hear them?
Yeah. No, I'd like to go back to something. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, of course.
Okay. The 2 things are, you hear this from young adults. These are college kids or post-college kids, and from their parents. First off, we train these kids for 18 years. Baptism, First Communion, confirmation, all that, 18 years. We send them out in 18 weeks, it's all undone, right? Or as Curtis Martin, you were saying, 2 days. They're not connected in 2 days. So what happens is they fall into a moral compromise. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's not even that extreme. They get drunk for the first time in their first week at college, right?
Yeah, first one to stand.
The first time to have sex, or maybe not even have sex, but to go really far. Right? Mm-hmm. They smoke marijuana the first time. Okay, so any of these kind of moral compromises. And then that next Sunday comes around. This is testified by thousands of college kids, and they know they know enough to know that they can't receive communion. And that's kind of embarrassing. And they need to go to confession, but they don't know what time confession is. They don't know where to go to confession. Yeah. And they had a late night Saturday night, and so they said, well, I just won't go. I can't receive communion anyway. I won't go to Mass tomorrow, but I'll go to confession next week, and I'll change it around. And then the next week rolls around, and maybe they compromise again. They don't know where to go to confession. And that happens till Thanksgiving, and by that point, they're out. So that's one reason.
Moral compromise, number one.
Moral compromise. The other reason that we see young adults in this age, and it doesn't have to necessarily be in college. This could be anywhere, but it tends to happen at 18 and going to college, freshman semester. The other one is they go to class, philosophy 101, history 101, literature 101, and for the first time ever, they meet a very respectable, dynamic professor who says, this is the Crusades. What a horrible thing the Catholic Church did. Or in Philosophy 101, here are the reasons why atheism is true.
Yeah.
Or here are the reasons why there is moral relativism.
And the Inquisition, etc.
In the Inquisition. And, there's about a collection of about 50 things, really, that they get hit with. And they have no answer. Mm-hmm. Or their roommate says, well, that's really judgmental of you to say that about homosexuals. How dare you? And they don't really know why. And they're like, well, yeah, I guess. And so that's the intellectual compromise that happens. And often those 2 things are happening at the same time, Patrick.
Yeah. It's a snake and tail, right?
Exactly. So it's a double beat, and really all it takes is till Thanksgiving for this to pretty much cement itself in the lives of our young people. We have not prepared them for that moment. We haven't prepared them to be, you mentioned covenant eyes at the beginning of the show. Our family has covenant eyes. What happens when they go off campus and they're issued a laptop, or an iPad from the campus and it's not locked down? First time ever. Mm-hmm. they're exposed to hardcore pornography,
Yeah.
drugs, alcohol. So we have not prepared them to walk out of our homes and go to a college campus. And it doesn't, not necessarily college, they can go to work and their coworkers say, check this out or try this.
Yeah.
We have not prepared them morally, and we haven't prepared them intellectually or given them the equipment to say, well, yeah, what about the Crusades or the Inquisition, or what about atheism,
And
or
how do you refute relativism? All the isms that they get
all the isms
thrown at them.
And their the only training they had was when they went on confirmation and had a weekend retreat or whatever. They're just not equipped. And our grandparents didn't go. I mean, I'm sure when they went away or left home, they had these crises, but it wasn't this extreme.
They had the sacraments, they had the what, they had the identity, they had the T-shirt, they knew the music and the prayers. They didn't have the why.
True.
And I've even, this is, you mentioned earlier, when I speak, every single Q&A, there is that teary-eyed. And interesting, it's almost always a mother whose concern has that heart for the lost sheep of their fold. And we're not talking about, Birkenstock wearing, felt banner making loopy Catholics. I mean traditionalist Catholics who go to Planned Parenthood to pray and pray the rosary nightly. That respectable, dapper professor with the smooth way of talking is smarter than mom and dad, and you get we are the average of the 5 people we're surrounded with. So when a mentor figure who's got a PhD in everything starts to chip away, often slowly, it's almost deliberate. Taylor, there's almost a kind of a fresh meat approach.
Yeah, I've heard professors talk like that. Absolutely. Yeah, we're wrong to think that our secular leftists are not also evangelists. They're just not for the true gospel. Mm-hmm. Everyone enjoys bringing someone to your way of thinking.
Yeah,
everybody. I mean, you look at the 4 horsemen of atheism. They were out there on the circuit. They were more busy than put together. You and me and Peter Craved and Scott Hahn. They were out there running 100%. That circuit, signing those books, converting disciples.
Mormons, Muslims, the list goes on. Communists, and look what they'll do for their creed, right? What do we do for our creed? They're walking the high wire. They're taking the bullet for their worldview. How invested are we in ours?
And we say, really, we can't eat meat on Fridays in Lent? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I know. First world problems.
Yeah.
So let's segue to CatholicLifePrep.com. What's the first thing people encounter in terms of the solution? How do you extend hope when someone, junior, tells their mom and dad, I'm gone, I'm not coming back? Those are hard words to hear.
It's very hard. We want the silver bullet, Patrick. We want there to be a book or a CD. If I just give them this Peter Crave CD, or I just give them this book by Patrick Coffin, they'll read it and they'll have the epiphany. And that's just very rare. When you ask around, it's very rare. There's not a silver bullet. Once they've left, it's really a time of prayer, sacrifice, patience, and having strategic conversations. Mm-hmm. And any personal equity that you have with that loved one is really your best investment with them. Dumping a pile of 6 books on them is probably going to push them away. I've heard of, people that, they read it and they came back. Great. But usually it's not. We've also found that young adults do not connect with the written word as much as people in the older times. Mm-hmm. Now it's all about what you and I are doing, podcasts, YouTube videos, the different kind of media, the visual and the audio.
Glass screen device.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You go like this.
Yeah.
And so what we want to do with Life Prep is we said, hey, let's make all these things concise where they can access them, and let's give them as much as we can, and directly, like if a professor says this objection, here's a 10-minute answer to it. Mm-hmm. And we're not just going to give it written. We have to give it to them audio, and we have to give it to them video, and it needs to be compelling. And so what we've done in Life Prep is we've gone through, for example, we have a whole module on sexuality and purity and pornography. We have a whole section on atheism, whole section on, Protestant objections. Mm-hmm. Basically just taking all the constellations of objections, putting them together in a module. And, we would ideally, I would love it if a 17-year-old girl logged in there and just went through it A to Z, that would be the best thing.
Before leaving. So,
yeah, before. And again, I'm looking at how we can stop the bleeding, like Catholic life prep, like we're prepping.
Yeah.
Once they're gone, this is not, hey, how are we going to bring them back?
Yeah,
now,
it's not
it
Catholic
can be
life
used
rescue.
For that.
It's not rescue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's sort of like triage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Like there's people over there, and they're really in bad critical shape, but these people coming in the emergency room, let's get a tourniquet on there. Let's put some pressure on that. Let's get this going. So that's more of the focus for Catholic life prep. And, if a young adult, another element, Patrick, is these young adults, they get taught about something about pornography or homosexuality. They're not going to call up mom and say, hey, it's kind of embarrassing. Yeah. Or, hey, I did this really bad thing last weekend and I need to, what's the deal on confession, or how can I get back to confession? There's a little bit of shame about this stuff, and you don't communicate directly with your parents your freshman year in college. And so one of the great things about Catholic life prep is there is an anonymous element to it. You can go in there and be like, now what's the story on pornography and how do I get off of it?
So you allow lurkers.
Well, I mean, your name's in there, but
right.
It's not publishing what you're watching, reading, or consuming.
It's not tracking your fishing around.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And or you want to go in there and learn, how do I answer atheists? You may not want to call dad and say, hey, I'm really thinking about becoming an atheist. You got any literature for me? But with Catholic life prep, if they have it, if you've signed them up for it, they can go in and they can get answers. And the coolest thing about it is we have 365-day a year support.
Is that
so they can go? Yeah. Well, in leap year, we actually add an extra day, a bonus day. But this is a way for them to go and ask the questions, to get theological help, philosophical help, moral help, and not necessarily call up their godparent or their parent and say, hey, I'm drowning in agnosticism or one night stands, or I'm thinking about going from marijuana to crystal meth. What do you think about that?
Right.
Yeah.
Now we have to call crystal meth a gateway drug. Now that the leftists have already sold us on weed.
Yeah, exactly.
What's next? Heroin.
Yeah. Right.
Can families watch this together and consume the contents so that those critical conversations can start before junior gets to freshman orientation week?
I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that I learned from parents who had multiple children and they hit a home run, all their kids are in the church. I asked them what was the most important thing, and I heard this several times, and so I think this is the conclusion, and my wife and I are trying to do it ourselves, and that is, they said, from a very early age with our children, we were very frank and open about the controversial issues, especially the sexual issues, which I was kind of surprised to hear. I mean, it makes sense, but they said, if my son at age 9 said, what is gay? We didn't just say, oh, let's not talk about that. What do you want for lunch?
Happy, son.
Yeah. They would talk about it and explain what it was about. Or, why can't I have an iPhone when I'm 10? Well, there's this thing called pornography. I mean, the pictures of naked people, and, we can't, and explain what these things are. And what that did, the parents didn't necessarily articulate it, but listening to their stories, I kind of brought it all together. What it did is from a young age, around 10, it told them I can ask mom and dad questions and get real answers. So by the time they were 16 years old, they had about 35 to 50 of these weird conversations with mom and dad. So guess what? It wasn't weird when they were 16, 17, 18. So, Sally can call home her friend and she's like, my roommate is a lesbian, Mom. What do you think?
Yeah.
Whereas if they never had those weird conversations with mom, they're not going to call home and say, my roommate is a lesbian.
Yeah, or there's a sex toy seminar on the second floor of our dorm.
Exactly.
I was sort of red-pilled about this issue of introducing children. Well, let me put it the right way. Red-pilled on the strategy of having the parents be the ones to introduce the reality of pornography to their children. Yeah. And what happened was I was recommended a book by Matt Fradd. It's called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures by Dr. Gail Pointer and Kristen Jensen. And that is a phenomenal resource. It was beta tested for 2 years with parents. Okay. And of course you don't show them anything explicit. Of course you're not jump-starting any undue curiosity. But you're the ones to introduce them to what will happen, and it's going to happen soon. So many parents, maybe it's, and I guess it's not just traditionalist Catholic parents, they're naive about what's being shown to their kids on the schoolyard.
Yes.
Early.
Yes. If you're an 8-year-old boy, there is a guy in your class who has an iPhone unlocked in your class. I don't care if you're at a Catholic school, public school, private school. There is a guy in your 8-year-old's class who has an unlocked phone. And curiosity is for real. And so you have to tell your kids. I remember telling, my sons, hey, if you're at school and a guy pulls out a magazine, this is kind of archaic. This is like our generation. Hey, check out this magazine I got from my uncle's house.
Look up a magazine in a historical document somewhere. But continue with your story, sir.
Yeah. You say, hey, that's not cool, and you go away. Or you tell someone, or you just get out of there. Because I said you're going to want to look. You're going to want to look at a naked girl. That's who we are as guys. So you're going to be curious. You're going to want to, but you got to say, hey, that's not cool, and you have to go away. Or if someone pulls out an iPhone or on their TV or computer and wants to show you some videos, you just say, hey, I don't look at that. It's not cool. And you just come home.
And if that would be another form of bullying. If they don't stop, then the teacher needs to know about it.
Right. So you just have to tell them. It's like what I tell seniors in high school, guys. I'm like, when you go to college, there's going to be a really cute girl that's way out of your league wearing a miniskirt, and she's going to come over to you and say, hey, what's your name? And sit on your lap and talk to you. Mm-hmm. Are you prepared for that moment? What are you going to do? It's going to happen. Like, wait, that's really going to happen to me? I'm like, yeah, it's probably going to happen.
Really, Dad?
You're going to be, yeah, I know. Yeah, it's probably going to happen. And I've had students come back to me and say, you remember, like, you told us that a cute girl was going to come sit on my lap and like talk to me? It actually did happen. He's like, thank you for telling me to prepare for it.
But luckily, it was a transgender activist.
Yeah, right. Behave.
Isn't the homosexual thing, when you say the homosexual agenda, people fall asleep because you sound like an angry white Christian male. But that is one of the more potent tools, if you will, in the devil's arsenal to deconstruct the Catholic faith. It's all soft, love bombed, love is love, don't hate. Even Pope Francis is now a mascot of Advocate magazine. Talk a little bit about sexual sanity with respect to same-sex attraction, because it's ubiquitous.
Yeah, I mean, we have it in life prep. We do homosexuality from natural law and from Scripture, because you need to know both. Mm-hmm. As Catholics, we need to know both arguments. They're distinct. They're distinct but related. And what young person doesn't want to wear the T-shirt "Love Wins" with the rainbow on it? We especially when you're a young person, you want to be inclusive. Right? When you go to university, it's just kind of this opening of the mind and new ideas and new people and new concepts. And I remember being 18 and a freshman and just all the exciting new ideas to explore. Yeah. And on the college campuses, this is a huge, as you say, agenda. And somehow we as Catholics need to present ourselves as compassionate, as loving, as listening, but absolutely dogmatically, I'll say the word dogmatically, firm on sexual morality. And it goes back to look, if your child doesn't know that fooling around the backseat of a car or having sex before marriage or using condoms they don't know that that's wrong. Well, then of course, why wouldn't homosexual activity not be wrong? I mean, they're going to be swept away within days of being on the college campus. So you need to life prep them, whether it's with My Catholic Life Prep at New St. Thomas Institute or another way, you have to prep them. They need to have had several hour-long conversations with you on this topic before they get their driver's license. They have to be prepped. You can't send someone into a UFC fight and not train them in jiu-jitsu and boxing and leg strikes and everything. They're going to get beat up. They're going to go to the emergency room. Yeah.
And on college campuses, they learn very quickly that the only mortal sin is intolerance.
That's right.
It's interesting how tolerance has somehow been baptized as a Christian virtue. It isn't. What does it even mean? But it's another cudgel used to bash the church.
Yes.
How young is too young for life prep? Would a 13-year-old, is that too young? Because your stuff is pretty rarefied. You're a lot more highbrow than I am. So how complicated is the philosophy and the discourse for, say, a 13-year-old? Is that too young?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking natural law. I think a 13, I have a 12-year-old, so I'm thinking, will my 12-year-old be able to access it? I think it maybe is it's too high for a 12-year-old. I think, everything that we've designed is where we're losing them is, again, 14 to 24. That's the decade that we lose them, 14 to 24. And so I really think 14, for this material is the best. But I think the conversations, I'm not hitting my 9-year-old and my 10-year-old, my 12-year-old with like hard hitting philosophy and theology, but I am already having the conversations. They ask, now who's Cardinal McCarrick and why is he in trouble? I explain to them what Cardinal McCarrick has done and what's going on in the church, and their eyes kind of, widen a little bit. But those conversations as Catholics we need to be having, and when I guarantee you, even if they're watching PG movies, they're slipping in little things, and they're going to ask, well, what's gay, or can a guy marry a guy?
Right.
And in schools, even in Catholic schools, Patrick, there are now same-sex parents at the parochial schools.
Correct.
Here, across the way here in Dallas, it's becoming a big deal, and parents are saying, my PTA dad has two dads. It's two guys.
Yeah, and children of trans and non-binary. It's people have no idea what avalanches are being prepared to come down the hill. And as we're talking, Taylor, I'm thinking it's not a bad thing that some of the material's over their head, because what they're going to face the first semester is also over their head. So it's good. You're learning to swim. Right. Don't learn to swim in a bird bath. You got to go to the deep end.
Yeah, we're preparing. We're knowing that the battle is coming. It's kind of like, at 18, your child is going to go into the UFC cage. You don't know who it's going to, is it going to be a historical criticism? Is it going to be philosophical? Is it going to be a really attractive girl, who, wants to stay out late? What's going to come out? I'm not quite sure. So let's prepare him or her as much as we can intellectually, and talk about the morality. Part of the things we do in Life Prep too is it's not just like pornography is bad. It's like, here's a strategy on avoiding pornography. Is your computer locked up? Is your phone locked up? Do you need to get covenant eyes using the code word Patrick, right? Before you leave, like having the conversation with parents and kids, like, hey, we're going to continue to pay your data plan. But we also think covenant eyes. We're going to continue covenant eyes. We think it's important. Your mom's still going to get notified of all your searches, Yeah.
You're right. Yeah. That's a bad day right there.
Yeah.
What about Catholic teens who, when they go to college, they get introduced to strange ideas? Not so much they become sexual libertines, but they join something to do with Wicca, or a New Age movement, or they get attached to an unapproved apparition, or something that just smells cult-like and has a kind of a brain lock on their kids.
Yeah, that's a big problem. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, Patrick. We have a module on New Age, Wicca, Eastern spirituality, because that's a major thing on campus right now. And, I felt that if we're going to address all these things, they're going to be getting hit with yoga, Eastern spirituality.
Yoga's huge. Yoga's all over the Catholic Church today.
I know. I'm not a fan. I'm against it. I mean, I realize people are going to probably sign up for Catholic Life Prep, take the class, and they're going to get to my yoga video, and they're going to be like, well, you're kind of strict on that. Yeah, I am strict on it. And I explain why. And I cite exorcists and all kinds of good studies on it. But they're going to be exposed to all of these, weird things and even radical things that might be on the far right. Like you said, a strange apparition, sedevacantism. We have a section on sedevacantism too. They might be skewed to the far right as well. So I think we've done a pretty good job so far, and we'll add to it if we have holes, of various ways in which young people can be drawn away off center. I mean, ultimately, like, you saw your child baptized, your child had first communion, confirmation. What do most Catholic parents want out there? When their child goes off to college, what's the next big step? Catholic matrimony. Unless they have a vocation to the religious life or priesthood, the next one is matrimony. And my wife and myself, we want our kids to marry just the most awesome Catholic spouses and have a bunch of grandbabies for us. And we want to start it all over with more baptisms and more first communions. Like, that's the beat of our heart. And if my wife and I did all this work and the diapers and the tuition and, all the things and the agony and the curfews and all these things, and then our kids, didn't marry Catholics or left the church and didn't baptize their kids, we had to have our little unbaptized, grandchildren. I mean, it would just be the worst. I don't even know how I could prepare.
Sisyphean in scope.
Yeah, and it's like when we hear these people in the Q&A, that's the reality. Yeah. It's horrific. And so, this is, we spend, or the kid spends, what, $180,000 to prepare for college, because they get a degree that a lot of them won't use, and to enter into adult world, Hey, why don't we spend a few hundred hours and, a couple $100 and get them some prep, so that our ultimate goal, which is to see them in heaven and to see them we have a section on how to find a good spouse. What do you look for when you're 22? When you're 22 years old, what do you look for in someone? Being Catholic and going to Mass is not necessarily enough. That's like stage one.
Absolutely, yeah. It's the
right?
classic. It's necessary but not sufficient, right?
Exactly. So these are the kind of things we need to prepare our kids for. So let's get serious about it. Let's look at these demographics and say, look, we are bleeding out 81%. We're bleeding out. That means if you have 5 kids, according to the raw demographics, 4 of them, adios. I don't want to accept that. I want to prepare my kids. I want to do whatever it is, whether it's going to the right liturgy, hearing the right sermons, making sure they go to a good place for confessions, having frank conversations with them about, if my 11-year-old says, Dad, what's crack rock? That means I have to stop what I'm doing and talk about crack rock. Because he heard it.
What is crack rock, Taylor?
Well, it's I believe it's a form of cocaine. You have to get on Wikipedia and figure this stuff out, because I'm not sure. But these are the kind of things we have to do. And just sending your kid to a Catholic school or make sure they go through confirmation is like 5% of the work.
Taylor,
it's nothing. It's nothing.
You're just laying your hand on something really important, and that is the belief that sacramentalization is the same thing as evangelization. Yeah. But I got them in the lineup for confession. But this box ticking mentality is the kiss of death, because it doesn't involve discipleship with Jesus Christ. Talk about the person of Christ, Taylor, and why we need to be talking about him. We need to be explicitly mentioning the name of Jesus in our conversations, in our discourses and so on, online and offline, because that holy name, it's the only name under heaven by which men can be saved. Acts 4 verse 12. Can I hear an amen? Amen. Which means that name divides. It separates sheep from goats, and it elicits mocking and anger, or it elicits wonder and awe.
Protestants have a better retention rate than we do, Patrick. And I believe the reason for that is just as you said. They talk about Jesus, they talk about the personal relationship. And let me say for the record, I love the sacraments. I've written books on it. I've done tons of info on it, courses on it. But there is a Pelagian view of the sacraments, that there's these 7 handles, and if we pull the 7 handles at the right times in our life, it's like a slot machine, and the 777 rolls and we go to heaven.
Yeah, ex opere operato, like the priest as Dairy Queen employee.
Yes.
Got my grace.
Just making them cones.
Yep.
So because of, that's like the most profane version of Catholicism. I heard another priest say it's like the gumball. You put in 25 cents, you get a gumball. It's an exchange. It's a transaction.
Yeah.
And it's really offensive, I think, to God. It's basically a Dairy Queen, a drive-through, levers on a machine. The sacraments are there not to restrict grace, but to spread them around like sprinkle heads coming around your yard, just putting the grace everywhere. And the purpose of that grace is so that we talk to Jesus Christ every day as our Lord and Savior, and we have contemplation, and we're in the presence of the Trinity, right? When we receive the Eucharist, we're talking to Jesus like, I'm glad you're here with me. You've made your residence with me, and it's transforming your life and enjoying the life of virtue and enjoying the gifts of life and rendering thanks, or Eucharistia, back to Jesus Christ. And so I think when we get into a rut as Catholicism, we get into the 7-lever jackpot, slot machine Catholicism, and we've got to get away from that. And, we got to focus on how do you organize and strategize your life to be a disciple for Jesus. That's actually module 2 in life prep. How do you read the Bible? How do you set up a cycle of confession every 2 weeks or every month? How do you choose Catholic friends, it has to be intentional. Like, you don't just happen to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. It doesn't just you don't just happen to read the whole Bible cover to cover. Like, oh, I just, well, I'm done. I read Revelation.
Yeah.
This is taking up the cross.
Make an appointment for that small wins. If you have an appointment that you got to work out at 11 o'clock, why don't you have an appointment to do a holy hour or eye breviary or a rosary or whatever?
Exactly. Or get your phone locked down. Only date Catholics. Only date people you would want to marry. Don't get alone with them at night when there's no parents and no one around. I mean, just kind of a basic intentional form of living. Because Patrick, you and I, we're married men. We don't just happen to go on dates with single women or happen to.
Whoops.
Yeah.
What am I doing in Vegas? And what was your name again?
Or I'm in a hotel room and whoops, this came on the TV. Yeah. We have to be very strategic as disciples of Jesus Christ, as men of God, and it doesn't just happen. I have to say, it's been kind of 3 weeks since confession. I kind of need to go. I'm going to move that meeting and I'm going to go to the noon confession. Like, it's intentional.
Yeah.
If you're not trying at this day and age, if you're not trying and saying, I'm going to make a go at this and be serious, you are going to fade away.
Catholic Life Prep, and I want people to go. This is a major thing that you've built, Taylor. I just think it's phenomenal. CatholicLifePrep.com is the website. Let me close with this. I like to tell the story of a daily mass going mom whose husband was abusive, didn't go to church, and she had this son, the classic black sheep, lived with his girlfriend, had a child out of wedlock, basically a sex addict. She prayed.
St. Augustine?
Prayed. Yeah. And the key here is that Monica, when she decided to let her son go altogether and give him to the Lord, because her arguments, I mean, he could think circles around her. Yes. But she prayed that someone would cross his path, and that came in the form of St. Ambrose, who blew Augustine's mind. This sounds like a kind of Ambrose in the lives of families, of parents who feel absolutely hopeless. Yeah. Because when they come home, and we talked about that first Thanksgiving return in the freshman year, the parents are outgunned. This sounds like a major piece of artillery for them. So
or it's not just Thanksgiving. They come home for Christmas and they say, Mom, I don't really want to go to midnight mass on Christmas. I'm not into that. Oh my gosh, the heartbreak.
Yeah, and if it was a Catholic university, it might come in the form of if there was a Jesus, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's just horrific. Yeah. So, and I like what you say there about Augustine and Monica. It's not, and I got to emphasize it, it's not about videos and arguments and tricks. It is about that. But fundamentally, this is about prayer, grace, sacrifice. And because of all that, we bring in the resources, we bring in the videos. But again, the best example, the number one thing that you can do for your children is yourself. Mom and Dad, be holy.
Yeah.
Let them see you waiting in line to go to confession. Yeah. Let them see you fasting on Friday. Not showy. I mean, John Paul II, he woke up in the night and he saw his father kneeling before a cross praying at night. He says, that's when I received my vocation to the priesthood.
Yeah.
He saw spiritual fatherhood in his natural father. And it awoke in him through the Holy Spirit a grace that millions, billions of people experienced.
Mm-hmm. So much to say, but we can't say it in this particular episode. Dr. Taylor Marshall. CatholicLifePrep.com is the website. I think I figured out what the subtitle is of the New Thomas Institute. Non alligabis os vobis is Latin for your alligator is not a cow. Right?
It's close. It's actually, you shall not bind the mouth of an ox.
Okay, there's a sly Thomistic allusion.
Yes, it's you shall not bind the mouth of an ox, which comes from St. Paul, actually comes from the Old Testament as well. And it's Thomas Aquinas is the dumb ox. And so our motto at New St. Thomas Institute is, thou shalt not bind the mouth of the ox. That is, do not restrict Thomas Aquinas. We need him.
One more time, catholiclifeprep.com, or to sign up for the New St. Thomas Institute at New St. Thomas. That's SAINT Thomas.com. Dr. Taylor Marshall, always a pleasure. Thanks for being part of the solution.
Hey, Patrick, love the show. You're doing excellent work. Keep up the great work. Everybody subscribe to Coffin Nation. Wonderful work.
Yeah, thanks so much. And we'll talk about manly manhood with your partner in crime, Timothy Gordon, in the new year. Deal?
That'd be great. Deal. Let's do it.
Okay, very good. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there? Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. If you like what you see and hear and you want to see and hear more, consider joining Coffin Nation as a full member. Just click right here and find out more about what that means. Nipsey, my fedora. That's Coffin Nation, the world's largest online community of culture builders. Click right here. See you on the inside.